Chase Thomas podcast. My nephew needs me to record. See, I already hate it. I hate it.
All right, hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Tennessee Vols Sports Guys here on a Sunday night, January 7th, where I am still the aforementioned Chase Thomas, coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, Everything School HQ, over there somewhere in Knoxville, Tennessee himself. Rocky Top Insiders Ryan Schumpert is here. Ryan, good evening, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well. Glad to be back. I feel like it's been a long time since we recorded one of these, at least a long time since I've been on one of them. So excited to get back and riding the high of my Titans ending just a fun season with a big win over Jags today.
Hey, Mike Vrabel going out his Tennessee Titans tenure with a bang.
That's what I said. That's what I told people yesterday at the basketball game. It's the final game of the Ryan Tannehill, Derrick Henry, Mike Vrabel era. And we didn't even ruin our draft spot. We were number 7 coming into today. Probably going to be number 7. Even a chance that we can move up to number 6, barring some crazy stuff. So good to end the NFL season for the Titans on a good note.
There you go. Happy for you, Ryan Schumpert. But no, it was weird. Now this week has been close to being back to normal. I love the holidays. I love Christmas time. Big lights guy, Ryan. You know this. Love a good lights situation here. We have lights all over my house. I got it going behind me. Like, we're good. But the one thing that drives me nuts, and I don't know if you're wired this way, but sir, I just get so flustered with my routine being thrown off, where I'm like, well, we can't do the Sunday night pods because we have this going on, and I can't do this night, and I like Christmas falls on this day, New Year's falls on this day, and I'm like, my schedule is completely thrown for a loop. So that's the reason we haven't done a Vols pod in the last 3 weeks. Is just the holidays. The holidays just completely destroy my routine, and I get so stressed not having my just go-to organization structure that gets me through each and every day.
Yeah, I don't have quite the same thing, which, I mean, I think makes sense. All the interviews you do, you have to be extremely organized, and obviously the way the calendar fell this year, but similar in the sense of just like not being down in Orlando for all the bowl prep stuff. I covered the game remotely, and Rick and Jack were down there covering it for us, of just like up, and it would just be like, okay, wow, so Heupel's talking right now, or so-and-so is happening, and like not having any idea, where in a normal flow of really the whole year, it changes throughout sports seasons of like knowing just what I'm going to write about on certain days of the week, and obviously stuff comes up and you get creative and find stuff, of just like waking up the whole week between Christmas and New Year's just being like, I don't really know what's going to go on today, what I'm going to write about, and just having it all hit me an hour or whatever after I wake up and saying, okay, this is how the day's going to go.
Absolutely. Well, we're back in good form. 2024, I was telling the Thomas family group chat, I was like, this might be the only time in every Tennessee sports fans' lives where one calendar year, in 2024 specifically, all 3 of the big 3 have playoff and or realistic title aspirations at the University of Tennessee. Rarely do you have all 3 at this similar stage where, and I don't know if you agree with me, but Tennessee now top 5 team in KenPom. They absolutely destroy Ole Miss Saturday night in TBA. Then you have Tony Vitello's bunch. We'll see what they look like, but they're going to be preseason top 5 in college baseball once again. They're going to be better than they were a year ago, where they won the College World Series. They have title aspirations, and it's realistic that they can win it all this spring. And then you have the Vols, who will be in the blue chip ratio based on their current roster going into this fall. Nico into fold, like top 6 Heisman odds. So that's a great time to be a Vol fan in general, because the playoffs are real. And then we've seen this Washington run that anything's possible when you have an elite offense, an elite quarterback play, that, hey, you can make a run, and you're really hard to beat when you have all those things clicking. But I don't know. I think this is a rarity, and I don't think you're going to see all 3 of the big 3 in Knoxville with realistic title aspirations at the same calendar time.
Yeah, I would sell Tennessee football having realistic title aspirations next fall.
But you could sell it. You could sell the playoff in the 12-team playoff with Nico being. If Nico's a Heisman type guy, they're in the playoff.
I for one don't really see Nico being a Heisman type guy. I guess to start it in his first year as a starter. And I don't know, we don't need to get into a big college football playoff debate, but it's
Sounds like you hate Nico Iamaleava before he's even taken a full season under his belt, Ryan Schumpert. I don't know what's going on here, but a lot of cold water right out of the gate after a 35-0 win.
Stupidity of the expanded playoff. Yeah, Tennessee has realistic playoff aspirations. Making the playoff doesn't mean you can win the national championship, which is why it's so stupid that we expanded the playoff to begin with. But that's beside the point. I don't need to be bitter about it. It's going to be the reality. So sure, yeah, to that end, like, yeah, Tennessee football is playoff. They have playoff aspirations that are realistic. Tennessee baseball, certainly the goal is going to be to get back to Omaha. And I think obviously we'll see what the season looks like, but you're kind of to the stage of, you think the talent, you've been there a couple times. It's like, all right, get there and now go do something. And then certainly, yeah, this is the Tennessee basketball team that has Final Four aspirations, and I think is as good, or is close to as good as any team Rick Barnes has had in Knoxville, and really close to as good as any team Tennessee's had. So yeah, obviously you enter this year with the year of 2024 with high expectations for all three sports teams, and I would say we'll see football a little bit more down the road, but especially the two that are in the immediate windshield with the basketball and baseball seasons.
Well, speaking of basketball, and I would agree that Tennessee has the least strong chance of winning. I've said for the last year that 2025 is the circled year. Year two with Nico, bolstered group, a lot of these freshmen, talented freshmen being a year older, especially the wide receivers, and how much I like them. Just year two, I think will be a lot bigger there. And then some of the linemen and group that's coming in, I think the 2025 class, depending on how George McIntyre stuff unfolds this spring, and a lot of those big names, Sanders, the 5-star tackle. There's just a lot of optimism about what 25 can be for Tennessee, and why that's probably the most realistic title year in the immediate Heupel era. But I think the playoff is definitely a possibility and should be the goal for Tennessee in 2024, especially with their schedule. It looks like they're going to be favored in probably 9 or 10 games once again this year, and I think that puts you right in the ballpark of making the playoff, Ryan Schumpert. But I first asked you, because it is basketball season, we have all offseason to talk all things Tennessee football. Basketball, though, 24 hours removed from Tennessee thrashing the Ole Miss Rebels in the second half. The biggest takeaway you're still thinking about from Vols Ole Miss on Saturday night in TBA is what, Ryan Schumpert?
Ken Pom was on the money, man, with this Ole Miss team. I mean, Tennessee obviously played really, really good, but this isn't an Ole Miss team that's the 22nd best team in the country by any means, and Tennessee will play a lot harder games than SEC play, and to play a lot better teams. And you just look at the percentage of it. But I think when you talk about the game itself, it's, to me, the continued development is Zakai Zeigler, who I think we all left Maui, as bad as he played in those 3 games, being like, what? Maybe not selling, not thinking that he couldn't get back to what he was last year, but just being like, all right, this is a serious question at this point. And almost from the jump in that North Carolina game, he started playing better, and it just felt like it's been a slow climb of him being better and better the last now 9 games. And he was fantastic. I thought he was the best player on the court against Ole Miss. He dominated a game where he missed his first 4 threes, and so much of what his scoring output feels like, all right, if he hits shots early, he's going to have a good game. If he doesn't, he's not. And when he didn't hit shots early, he stayed confident. He goes on to score 17 points. And really, he and Jonas Aidoo, who I'd say was, who he would compete with to be the best player on the court last night, teamed up in that pick and roll, and they just really dominated an Ole Miss defense that, not that it's elite or anything, but is certainly solid. And, I had questions about Ole Miss coming in, but more about Ole Miss's offense than I did defense. So those 2 guys who, big pieces for Tennessee, just because of, you look at the spots on Tennessee's roster where they don't have a ton of depth. It's at point guard and it's in the interior. And 2 dudes that Zeigler can really raise the ceiling by being good offensively and the way he gets other people involved when he's good offensively. And Aidoo certainly raises the ceiling when he's on offensively, just from giving the Tennessee an interior presence that, it really hasn't consistently had since Grant Williams.
Aidoo I did not have as like this kind of jump. I thought Aidoo would be better. I did not have Jonas Aidoo making this kind of leap and dominating in the way that he did. What has been the most impressive part of Aidoo's development from what you saw the first 2 years versus this year? Where do you think he's grown the most?
I think it's just like confidence on the offensive side of Like, you look at what he does offensively, and there's not one thing where I'm like, wow, that's so much better. We just never saw him show flashes of that. Man, where did that come from this offseason? That was clearly a massive emphasis. He just feels really sure of what he's doing on the offensive end. And look, like, sometimes that leads to him taking mid-range jump shots early in the shot clock that will drive you insane. But I think you live with that just because it's the confidence that he's playing with, and he's capable of hitting those shots. He's capable of coming out to the three-point line and hitting those shots. And I think he's been more consistent finishing around the rim. I think when you talk about why he's able to score a lot more, it's probably that. But it's not like he's a guy that Tennessee throws the ball into with his back to the basket and he scores a bunch. He just, in the pick and roll, off drives, is confident, plays with conviction, knows what he's doing. And that's something that he really didn't show a lot in the first 2 years. It seemed like he was frequently doubting what he was supposed to be doing, maybe not necessarily doubting himself, but doubting what his role was in the offense and what was a good shot and what wasn't a good shot for him, and when he should pass it out when they throw it inside to him. Everything he does is just way more comfortable. And again, I think just way more sure of himself.
And we talked all offseason was like, the thing I wouldn't see was him shooting more threes. But he's dominating without even really doing that. Like, that's not really added to his game, and he's actually dominating in a way that I didn't think was in him.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I feel like the full-on emergence of Tennessee playing four guards and how well Josiah Jordan-James has shot the three-pointer on that trailer top of the key three has kind of taken that away. Like, that was the spot you would have probably pointed to Aidoo shooting a lot of threes. I feel like the ones that he's taken and made have been corner threes. Like, that's mainly where he's getting them. But he's been so good playing on, from the short corner and getting little dump downs and being able to take one dribble and score with some confidence that, again, it's not like he's, I questioned his ability to be an elite scorer because he's not a guy that you're going to throw the ball into with his back to the basket. He's going to be productive, but he's been able to catch the ball with his face to the basket, tight spaces, and still score, which is probably, I guess, when you're trying to pinpoint where his offensive game has grown the most from, just one thing he does a lot better. I think it would probably be that.
Yeah, I think it's been huge. Like, Aidoo making the leap has been huge. Josiah Jordan-James being the team MVP to this point in the year has been huge. Zakai, the early stuff was just an aberration, it seems like. Like, he's locked in. Zakai's playing just awesome basketball. The two spots that they're not playing awesome. And look, I'm not going to do a victory lap here, but Ryan Schumpert, you know how I feel on this very program about a certain Tennessee Volunteer basketball player who I love quite dearly. Mashak, 2 threes in the first half, the 3 at the buzzer to get this team going into the second half.
That's not where I thought that was going.
Mashak is just an absolute delight. I love Mashak so much.
Yeah.
And we're inching closer, Ryan Schumpert, to the point of no return here, because guess who was playing down the stretch here in clutch time, and he was the better player. And I wondered the last couple of weeks, how does the best 5 work? Who does Barnes end up trusting the most in crunch time? Who's going to be his 5? We're inching closer and closer to Dalton Knecht not being in that 5. We're inching closer and closer to that 5 being Zakai, Santi, Jemai, Josiah Jordan-James, and Jonas Aidoo. The rise and fall of the Dalton Knecht stuff is just happening very, very rapidly. And I don't know. I don't know if you're as concerned as I am, but Mashak's better than Dalton Knecht in SEC play. And I think Barnes is going to end up trusting Jemai a lot more as SEC play keeps going. And look, I love it because Jemai is great. Now, does that mean the ceiling's lower if Dalton Knecht is just not what we saw in the UNC game going forward? Like, even close to what we saw in the UNC game? Yeah, I think it's going to be harder to win.
Wisconsin game would be the game to point to.
Or Wisconsin too.
Yeah, because he's never going to get what North Carolina game like that.
Yeah,
that was never a reality.
No, but I'm saying that's the peak. Like, that was the highest of highs. Like, that's the best case scenario. No one else in that team right now can do what Dalton Knecht did in the North Carolina game. No one has that kind of offensive upside. I just don't know. Like, I'm very concerned about where that's headed, and if, like, they're going to be able to, it's just going to be hard. It's going to be hard to navigate this. And I think this is what happens when you have a super deep team, is you have good options. It's a good problem to have if you're Rick Barnes. I don't know. Are you sounding the panic alarm for Dalton Knecht, or do you think it really doesn't matter because Jemai's playing this good?
No, I definitely think it matters. I don't sounding it in the way that you are, but I know I do think it's fair. Like he's been a less consistent scorer for sure. I think it's you said it kind of in a definitive way of like this is your best five: Zakai, Vescovi, Jemai, Josiah, Jonas. I think Zakai and Josiah are going to be your best five every single night. I think most nights it's going to be Jonas at the five. I think we've seen games where it's been Tobe though too. So I'm not, you don't think it's going to necessarily always be that. And I think you're going to see a rotation at those 2 and 3 spot of Santi, Jemai, and Dalton. I think all three of those guys could be it on any given night. And matchups are going to call for it a lot because just the way Jemai can absolutely change a game with his defense if you're playing a team with an elite wing or perimeter scorer. But at the same time, Dalton, I'm not sounding the alarms of him just being like disappearing or being, terrible by any means. I'm sounding the alarms of Tennessee. You felt like they had a guy that was going to give them 15 points every single night. And that wasn't like the first 4 or 5 games. That was the first 9, 10 games of the season. You felt that way. I'm sounding the alarms maybe on that maybe Dalton Knecht's not that guy. Though I do think yesterday was like a lot better than what we saw against North Carolina State and Tarleton State, even though he wasn't great. But I guess it's kind of roundabout to answering everything you said. But I do think that lowers Tennessee's ceiling, and finding that from him would be huge. But no, I think it's certainly a possibility that Tennessee's not going to get that from him every night, and it's not going to be a sure. To your point, it's not going to be a sure thing that Dalton Knecht in your best 5, your closing 5 every single night.
Yeah, and we'll see. But like that's a good problem to have about depth, because maybe Jemai hits a wall and then Dalton, maybe it's just flashy, or maybe it's just not something you can count on every night, but Dalton still has it in him, where like some nights he might bail you out against Kentucky or something. Like he has a 30-point just flash against Kentucky.
What he did against Illinois. Tennessee doesn't win that game if Dalton can. They could. It was Tennessee was so Tennessee last year for 10 minutes, maybe even 15 minutes in that Illinois game, and then Dalton Knecht showed the flash that the way he can score at a really high level. It pulled Tennessee back ahead, and then that just relaxed everybody else on the court, and everybody started getting more comfortable in making the shots that are good shots for each player.
Well, maybe the answer is here. We both love Santi on this program. He's on track to have his worst season as a Vol right now. His shooting's down all across the board. He had a big shot, though, at the end. He felt like you could see his reaction. I don't know if you noticed it, Ryan, but his 3 near the end of the game last night, you could see it was like kind of like a sigh of relief for him, where he's just, you can tell it's wearing on him, like these kind of early season struggles. And I understand the offseason stuff and dealing with having to go back overseas and tragedy in the family. And it's just been a weird last couple of months for Santi. It was always kind of up in the air if he was coming back, to be like, we weren't sure if Santi was going to come back to begin with, but he was someone that you thought, worst case scenario, you locked in. You're like, you're not worried about Santiago Vescovi at this point in the Rick Barnes system. But I don't know. Maybe that's where it is Jemai gets it when Santi's just not shooting right, and Barnes just has to move around a little bit. And it's like, all right, Jemai's going to play the 2 and Dalton's going to play the 3, and we're going to rely on Dalton's offense more than Santi. So maybe it's like whoever has it that night between Santi and Dalton is where Barnes sacrifices a little bit defensively. So I don't know. I think that's also in play, is maybe Santi isn't closing as much as he has in years past. And I mean, are you concerned that maybe we're now in January and Santi has not turned the corner yet?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I would necessarily even say that. He hasn't had like the splashy game, but I think he's been pretty solid.
He's shooting 33% from 3?
At least important games. Yeah, 34%. But at the same time, I mean, the last meaningful games, he shot 6 of 17 from 3, which I don't know. I guess that's 36. I don't know. I'm not a math guy. He's been more consistent, I think, in being a solid player. You haven't seen him just disappear. And that's the thing. Santiago, what I don't think maybe some people in Tennessee's fan base don't understand is like Santiago Vescovi does a lot of good things on the court, even when he's not scoring. And I think that's invaluable. He's a good defender. He's a really good passer. He knows Tennessee's offense. He spaces the floor, which sets up driving lanes and makes the pick and roll so effective like it was last night when you have him and Josiah Jordan-James, 2 dudes that are, teams have to fear, and if Knecht's in the game, him too. So to your point of maybe he's in there in closing time less than he's been. Yeah, because he's been in closing time every single game the last 2 years. So in that sense, yes, I think it's a possibility. But, I'm not overly panicked. I don't think you're necessarily going to see a bunch of 16, 18-point games like we saw from him last year, but that's because his usage is just going to be a lot lower because they don't need him to do that as much. I think he's going to be a guy that, we're one game in SEC play. What did he shoot from three last night? 3 of 8, 40%. I'm guessing he'll end up shooting 38% in SEC play. Maybe
they need it.
Yeah, maybe that's me not putting too much confidence in him. I think he's going to be good. He's going to be solid. He's not going to put up the same numbers because they're not going to ask him to. But, I'm not overly worried about him. And just because he necessarily hasn't had that big breakout game, I don't think that necessarily means he isn't playing better than he was earlier in the season.
Well, last thing on Tennessee basketball before we get into some football portal stuff. Mississippi State this week, midweek game, a little bit different than baseball midweek games. Ryan Schumpert for you. It's not.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, you don't get Belmont in the middle of the week this week. Even though Tennessee really should play Belmont
big win
basketball.
For Belmont basketball today. Yeah, that'd be a great game. Big win for them over Drake today.
All right, that's the Belmont basketball hour here on this very program. Ryan Schumpert. Mississippi State though, very different. I think Mississippi State's a better team than Ole Miss. Not as flashy, obviously not the same kind of publicity that Chris Beard and the Rebels got coming into Knoxville, but I think this is going to be a much more low-scoring, gross basketball game where I think Tennessee will be much more of a dogfight, pardon the pun here, with the Mississippi State Bulldogs. But do you agree that Mississippi State-Tennessee will be a slot fest, but something that Tennessee should be able to get another dub here?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a hard-earned game and a hard-earned win. Tennessee should win, but I think Mississippi State's better than Ole Miss. I think they're going to play a very muck-it-up brand. They're a very similar team than they were to what they were the last 2 years. I think they've gradually gotten better each of the last 2 years, and they're a better team. But it's not going to be easy by any means. And I think this kind of goes back to the importance of Dalton for me, too, is that last night was great from Tennessee. Awesome performance. Looked like a Final Four team. Amazing. We've seen Tennessee do that the last 2 years. We saw Tennessee put performances like that earlier this year. My question for this Tennessee team is, can they go out there night in and night out and be good and not have these massive duds like they had at Florida last year, or, really a number of times where it's just like pull your hair out like this team's terrible. And obviously they're not terrible, but it's like, man, this is awful.
My genetics took care of that. My genetics took care of that. That was the bit. You said pull your hair out.
I didn't hear what. Yeah, I didn't hear what you said. That's pretty good. But to me, what felt like was I don't know what pushes you past that point, I guess, is that you had a guy that could go out and every single night was going to score you 15 plus points in Dalton Knecht. That's where I think Dalton Knecht maybe not being the guy that Tennessee thought he was going to be is most important. Because when Tennessee's offense and when Tennessee plays its best, they don't need Dalton Knecht to score 25 points or to score 20 points. Because when they're at its best, shots are falling. They got a bunch of different dudes that can beat you. It's the graphic that they posted earlier in the year of all 5 starters have scored over 20 points this game. And that's awesome. That's how you can make a long run in March. But when you don't have a guy that can go out there and score, hey, I'm getting 15 points or I'm getting 13 points from this guy every single night. That's the floor. That's how you also lose early in March. And that's how you lay duds. And there's a lot of dudes on this Tennessee team that we know can do that. Now, maybe one of the upperclassmen proves that they're past that and they've taken that jump and you're not going to have that from them. Or maybe Tennessee just has so many options that it's just so unlikely that there's truly going to be a night where no one steps up. But to me, that's what I want to see from this Tennessee team. I want to see consistency, ability to score 70 plus night. 70 is the baseline in SEC play every night. I don't care who you're playing. I don't care where you're playing them. That's the baseline. Because if Tennessee does that, they're going to win more times than not, and they're never going to get blown out. So that's what I want to see from Tennessee. Mississippi State is a team that will 100% test that on the road. They're really good defensively. They're really physical. It's going to be hard to score at the basket. If you don't get a bunch of shots to go from the perimeter, it could be hard to beat them. So yeah, I think it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a tough game. A game Tennessee should win, yes, but by no means a layover. And a Mississippi State team that's going to be really in desperate need of a win this week. They lose their SEC opener against what's going to be a vastly improved South Carolina team, and now they get Tennessee and Alabama at home this week. Mississippi State needed one of those games badly, and certainly they're capable of beating either team.
Absolutely. Well, the portal giveth, the portal taketh. Ryan Schumpert, Gerald Mincey, who theoretically could still return, I guess, to Tennessee. We'll see what happens here. He's got a lot of leverage right now, at least with Tennessee, because as it stands right now here on January 7th, your starting right tackle in 2024 is Dane Davis, which year 4 in the Heupel era is just, not to go full VolQuest message board genius here, but unacceptable that is a spot that you currently find yourself in year 4 at a premier program and an NIL collective program that is as dominant and as good as where Tennessee is. I think it's really fascinating because I'm a little anxious about it. I mean, we'll see what happens with Hurd, the 5-star offensive tackle transfer out of LSU. You get left at the altar with the guard tackle swing guy from Kansas today. He commits to Texas A&M after spending a lot of time in Tennessee this weekend. I don't know. I'm a little. It's just you're kind of walking on eggshells a little bit. For me, Ryan, I go back and forth on this, and I don't know if you share this. Look, the Iowa game was bad. The offensive line especially the tackles, got their butts kicked, but Iowa's top 10 defensive line. Like, that's a really good defensive line. Nico showed that he's going to be able to navigate the pocket really well, even if things break down. It's not as much of an issue as Joe being back there. Hendon just evaded a lot of stuff 2 years ago, turned something out of nothing into something, and I don't really worry about it as much because Glenn Ellaby. Now, we have some issues about the development of the guys that he's bringing on the recruiting trail, but by and large, I mean, Tennessee still ran the football extremely well against Iowa. They run the football extremely well every year. Heupel's been there. The offensive line, it's not like they're taking a bunch of sacks, and we're looking at Bama and their defensive line. They haven't given Tennessee all kinds of problems even in the last 3 years when they're playing them. Like, there's a level of concern, but then I also just go back and I'm like, when the games actually happen, J.J. Crawford shut down Alabama at the left tackle spot. He's like looking at the Alabama defensive line and throwing up in their face and just being like, I'm not scared. And that's a JUCO transfer who just was not a well-hyped name. And I don't know. I'm very conflicted in how I view what's happening right now with the tackles and the offensive line and recruiting and the portal and everything else. And I don't know. Where are you at? Is that all fair? The way, just me trying to process where Tennessee's at in this regard?
100%. Yeah, I'd say I feel in a pretty similar boat, and none of it's a surprise. I mean, if anyone listens to this program regularly, this feels like this has been a conversation we can't go 2 to 3 weeks without discussing the last year and a half of, like, offensive line, the depth, the tackle spots, what they have coming in. This is a problem. And they do keep on making it work to a degree. But yeah, to your point, like when you're staring down Dane Davis being, started a football calendar when the team comes back on January 2nd, potentially right tackle number 1, that is worrisome. Now, granted, if it came to that, if Tennessee really does strike out and doesn't get anybody, reliable potential tackle starter, surely the plan would be for like Sham Umer up to start, like force feed this dude development for a year. But yeah, I mean, it's a concern with what they have. To me, the tackle stuff's just so much of a bigger deal than the guard stuff. That's why obviously they wanted the Reed Adams kid to win to Texas A&M. It would have been a good guy to get because you don't have depth and he has some versatility, which would have been important. But I don't think he was the plan to start at right tackle to replace Gerald Mincey anyway. So I don't think that's the end of the world. I think they can make it work in the interior spots. But even if you had Gerald Mincey, you're talking about your third offensive lineman or third tackle being Dane Davis, and then who's for? Like, it's a concern, the lack of depth, and it's a concern that it just feels like any potential solution in the short term and maybe even past the short term, even into 25 a little bit, is like Band-Aid stuff. That's you're getting by with it. And you can win 9 games with it. Maybe you can win 10 games with it. But can you win a national championship with it? I don't really think so. So it is a concern. It's not maybe a massive slam the panic button thing, but certainly somewhere Tennessee has to get better. And surely there's got to be just tons and tons of emphasis on developing Umarov and developing Bennett Warren when he gets on campus, because you just can't keep doing this forever, of band-aiding it and expecting to win at the highest level.
No, and it's it's just kind of wild that we're in year 4 and they're in that, but we'll see. Like Alec Ablin kind of getting some success here. He gets a big 4-star kid, his first offer. I don't know how to pronounce this kid's last name. Do you know?
No, I don't. I didn't write a story on it either, so I don't know a ton about him.
4-star kid though, good talent, like highly regarded tight end. Alec Ablin, because he was behind, and that was like the Roger Salapinga and stuff like that, where you're just getting in late, and part of recruiting is like you build these relationships years out. And now that he's been the tight ends coach for a full calendar year, building these relationships and been on the road for a while, he's going to start getting some of these wins. So that's important because, again, the depth here, they've been getting Band-Aids with McAllen Castles and Princeton Fance and guys like that. And Princeton's a great player, and they missed him a lot this past year. But you're getting Holden Stays. We'll see how he does, but that's another just Band-Aid situation. Ethan Davis didn't play at all last year. Didn't see him really at all in the bowl game. So you're kind of counting on him to be just a plug and play. And all right, 4-star talented kid, it's time to go. Like you gotta perform now. Get ready. And then, the offensive line, what's your gut tell you? Do you think Mincey finds his way back and that this is just one of those, he pulls his name out if Tennessee doesn't get another right tackle, or do you think he's gone?
I mean, I wouldn't completely close the door, but my gut tells me, it's not going to happen. I don't really see it. I don't think it's all that logical. Tennessee's hand truly does get forced so badly that they got to cut the check for him to come back. Yeah. But for a kid that was such a headache off the field and a pretty mediocre player on it, I have a hard time seeing it personally.
I don't know. Nothing would surprise me on this regard. It would not surprise me if he's back. It would not surprise me if he's 100% gone. I just think in this era, you just can't rule anything out. And you're right out of time here. Wouldn't rule it out. The dead period's coming up. This is it. You don't want to be sitting around waiting. And if the offers aren't there, Mincey isn't able to do better than what Tennessee may or may not have offered him. Are you sure he's out? Are we sure that he just completely... Maybe it's just he really wants to play left tackle, and John Campbell's back, so he can't... There's no path to him playing left tackle for Tennessee this year, but, I don't know. Why is that... Maybe if that's such a big deal, you're like, why? Because, Darnell Wright, right tackle, full year, and top 10 pick. It doesn't necessarily matter which side you're on and where you're getting to that next level, but I don't know. Like you said, this is... I think Glenn Ellerby, to calm a lot of Tennessee Vol fans' fears about where things are headed, one of these guys he's brought in has to develop. Whether that's Sham at the right tackle spot, whether it's Max Anderson, William Satterwhite, Bennett Warren, Bison Lang next year after Cooper's gone. One of these guys has to show promise, or there's something really, really wrong with how the development of guys that you're picking out of the high school ranks. There's clearly something wrong if a couple of those guys don't start popping, because that's the whole, you just have to, because it's not sustainable to be in transfer portal hysteria on the offensive line every year.
No, 100%. No, you definitely have to. And I think, to me, Lance Hurd seems like a guy you should be going just all out to get.
Yeah.
Obviously there is always a certain amount of money that's not worth it, but all the resources you have for a guy that can play multiple seasons and is clearly very talented, to me that feels like a no-brainer. Maybe again, maybe all the offers and what everybody's offering him and going after him is super, super high, and it truly isn't worth it. But that feels like one. It just makes too much sense for Tennessee when you talk about almost an assured starting spot at right tackle, and the guys that Tennessee has missed out on when you go back to Jordan Seaton and the financial package Tennessee had for Jordan Seaton of this just seems like it should make it work. And I will go back to, you mentioned the tight end spot. I think you can get by band-aiding there. Obviously you don't want to do that forever. I think you can get by band-aiding. It's just not a massive part of Heupel's offense to me. Now, obviously, if you have someone really talented, you could use it more, but I think you can kind of get by. Now, they've been really fortunate that they haven't had injuries there. That's where they've been fortunate, because that's the problem, is that they have zero depth. I think with the actual talent level or the play that you've gotten from the starters, I think that's fine. I think they can continue to get by with that.
We shall see, Ryan Schumpert. Final thing here. We're going to do this every week leading up to the college baseball season, which will be here before you know it, Ryan Schumpert.
Yeah.
Player Spotlight, our weekly Vol baseball player spotlight series. First up, Drew Beam, sir. Refresh the good folks, Tennessee fans listening here on this Sunday evening, what Drew Beam is all about, his development over the last 2 years, what makes him a great pitcher for Tennessee, and why he'll be the Friday night ace for Tennessee going into 2024.
Well, he'll be the Friday night number one ace because Chase Burns transferred to Wake Forest this offseason, and he's going to be the national preseason pitcher of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And I probably shouldn't have led that. That's too mean to Drew Beam, because Drew Beam's a fantastic pitcher. I mean, quarterback one, what they call him, former Blackman high school quarterback, really, really competitive kid, a really effective pitcher, and he's not going to necessarily blow you away with the fastball or just the overall talent or just the wow factor, but he's just really steady and he's really good. And he came in with a year where Tennessee had Chase Burns, who was a massive 5-star recruit and a day one starter, and Chase Dolander, who was one of the most highly touted kids in the transfer portal. And obviously we've seen what he went on to do. And for the first 2.5 months before Drew Beam's arm fell off, essentially, Drew Beam was the most effective, put up the best numbers of any of them. He was just fantastic. And he goes out there, he's a Frank Anderson pitcher, and the fact that he throws strikes at a really high level, he can get deep into the games because of that. He gets a lot of early outs. He's obviously can strike a lot of people out. He has the ability to do that, but he's not a guy that relies on that the way that Dolander did. And certainly Burns does to a degree too. And we saw that, especially with Dolander last year, that got him in trouble a lot if he didn't have his breaking ball working, because he just couldn't. People would just sit fastball, and he couldn't close out at bats. And then you'd have a start that was Dolander would be solid for most of it, and he gets 5 innings into it, gives up 3 runs, and doesn't blow you away. So I think the thing when you talk about where he's developed and where he has made himself into a projected first round pick in the 24 MLB draft is the changeup, which has become one of the best, if not the best, in college baseball. It was absolutely dominant down the stretch last season, and he's a guy that he probably gets overshadowed because of how much Chase Burns turned around this season coming in from out of the bullpen. But he was another guy that was a little more shaky the first half of the season. Again, never as bad as Burns, and wasn't quite as dominant as Burns towards the end of the season, but was fantastic. The closing stretch of SEC play, you go to the final SEC series of the year at South Carolina, things just blew up on Tennessee in game 2, which was game 1 of the doubleheader on Sunday. Drew Beam came in for a 7-inning game, was dominant for, I think, 6 1/3 or something like that, and got Tennessee their first away series win of the year on the last day of the regular season. He went in, he dominated Charlotte in game 3 of the Clemson Regional, and then on the biggest stage of the season, he was absolutely fantastic at Southern Miss, and probably could have gone a little bit deeper. Tennessee didn't have Chase Burns so fresh in the bullpen in that game. So he was a guy that I think was pitching at his very best in his Tennessee career to end last season, and that largely came in part because of how much that changeup had developed and turned into probably his best pitch.
Is there anything you're looking for that will kind of calm? Because I mean, he's going to be probably first round, second round pick this summer in the MLB draft. Is there one thing that's still missing that you think he can add that will separate him and get Tennessee to getting Tennessee where they need to go?
That's a good question, and I'm not a pitching coach expert or by any means like that. I would say that the changeup's become the primary off-speed pitch. If he could get his slider better, be more effective as a out pitch, I think that would take him to another level of being a true elite strikeout guy. But he's able to throw it for strikes early in counts, and it's kind of been a get me over pitch pretty effectively for him. So I'd maybe point to that. But no, I mean, I think the question would just be, how does he handle the pressure and the spotlight and the getting circled? Everything's going to circle him. The past 2 years, everybody circled Chase Dolander or Chase Burns. He's the guy now. And then you got Sunday. It's like, oh my gosh, you still got Drew Beam. Now he's the guy that every scouting report going into the week, everybody's going to be figuring out for every SC opponent. Drew Beam's the guy they're circling. So that's the only thing you worry about. Can he handle all that? I personally don't really worry about that for him. I think he'll be really solid, but that's maybe what I would point to of just proving it as a true Friday night guy, because obviously he hasn't had to do that to this point in his career, and then maybe developing that slider a little bit more.
I'm excited. I think Beam's solid. Like, he doesn't. There's just not Burns is electric. The stuff's electric, but it was also like Burns was out of the rotation for a reason last year. Like Beam is never really put, like he's just steady Eddie, and he's kind of like, it's kind of exciting to think about him at the Friday night spot. And then I wonder too, Ryan, is there some part of you that wonders if Frank and Tony don't want to rock what's worked for Drew Beam over the last 2 years? And do you think they could do you think they could keep him on Sunday, or do you think it's a guarantee that he pitches on Friday nights?
I think it's pretty much guaranteed he at least starts the season pitching on Friday night. Maybe if he runs into some trouble, you move him around. But I just don't see it because there's no other. There's not even. I guess AJ Russell is the other obvious second starting pitcher for Tennessee. But talking about a dude that threw like 14 innings last year, so to throw him into a Friday night spot would be a lot. And then, but to get past those two guys, there's not even an obvious. That's probably my biggest question about this team right now. Is who's going to be the third starter in the rotation behind those two guys? So
who's the leader in the clubhouse
right
now?
See that.
It's January 7th, Ryan. Who's the leader?
I couldn't even tell you. I mean, I think Nate Snead has the potential, like has the highest ceiling of everybody else in that group. But certainly if you said Nate Snead or the field, I'm taking the field, without a shadow of a doubt. I think that's very much going to be something that they're going to tinker with early in the season, probably even in the SEC a little bit, and would by no means be surprised if it ends up being kind of like an
and that's okay, because Andrew Lindsey came on. He wasn't penciled in, and Andrew Lindsey basically forced his way into that rotation.
Yeah, 100%. And that's what I'm glad you brought Andrew Lindsey up, because that's what other thing I was going to say about Drew Beam that I like about him a lot on Friday night is you mentioned the consistency and the steady Eddie. How many times last year did Tony Vitello, when they made the move to Andrew Lindsey on Friday night, talk about it as like, you just going into Friday night, it's just so comforting knowing what you're going to get from the guy. And again, Andrew Lindsey's another guy that wasn't just going to blow you away with his stuff and wasn't the most electric dude in the world, but he was just good, and you knew what you were going to get from him, and you knew he was going to be solid. And Drew Beam, whose ceiling is higher than Andrew Lindsey's, is that the complete same thing, that you can know what you're going to get from him. You know he's a guy that you can count on every single weekend out there.
I think it's going to be fine. Tennessee fans, don't worry about who the third pitcher is yet. I think there's a lot of talent, and it's just going to be, like you said, I don't think whoever the opening 1, 2, 3 Friday, Saturday, Sunday night pitchers is going to be where we're at come NCAA tournament time. Like, I'd be very surprised if it's the exact same as what they open with. They're going to have to figure it out.
I completely agree, and I think in some ways, Tennessee baseball fans are all kind of, not all of them, but a lot of them are very new to college baseball and how that works. And they've kind of been spoiled in the sense the last few years. And obviously things did get tinkered around last year of just like knowing who your main horses were going to be.
Yeah.
That's very, very rare in college baseball. Like even in the SEC, that's really good. And he's going to have 7 or 8 teams in the top 25 preseason and 6 in the top 10, like they always do. You're going to have like maybe Arkansas and Vanderbilt are like, all right, these are your 3 guys, and barring injury, they're going to start all 10 series throughout, all 10 weekends in SEC play. That's not how it works for most teams, even good teams, even good pitching staffs. So, again, to your point, that's not something I think people should panic about. And I completely agree that I'd be surprised of what we see starting rotation opening weekend when Tennessee heads to, I think it's Dallas, somewhere in Texas, Dallas or Houston. I think it's Dallas for the Shriners Children's Hospital Classic. I don't think that's what you're going to see the first weekend of the NCAA tournament.
How excited are you for the first text? Panic text from me in the neutral site game.
Oh man, it's gonna be much like how I felt when Jack sent the message in our chat this afternoon that the Jags would have gone 14-3 if Trevor Lawrence hadn't got injured. Where I can't tell if he was just ribbing at me or if he actually meant that seriously, and I just had to. I did a good job with Jack. I just didn't respond. I just gave him the thumbs up. I couldn't get bogged down into it. Chase, you're a lead at it. I'm sure you'll get me bogged down into whatever you're getting upset about, and you'll have me worked up at how worked up you are at something that happened in game 1 of a 52-game season.
I can't wait to put Ryan Schumpert back in a blender for this college baseball season, because it's long, it's a grind, and we watch all of them, and look, it's part of the deal. It's part of what you signed up for, Ryan Schumpert.
I don't think it did anyone any favors last year that in the midst of a bad opening weekend for Tennessee baseball, Tennessee basketball got run at Kentucky, and that increased the excitement and hope for the baseball season, or the need for the baseball season, and just kind of put everybody on edge. And you didn't listen to Tony Vitello, who told everybody who would listen that Tennessee was not the number 2 team in the country last year. You didn't listen to him. So I listened to him, and I expected not the level of struggles Tennessee had early, certainly not, but I wasn't as surprised by Tennessee's early season struggles last year as you were.
The one thing I'll say, though, too, and we'll wrap up here, is like one thing I do worry about that's like a silly thing to worry about, but like the most Tennessee thing ever is the deepest run of the Vitello era is with the least talented team they've ever, the least talented offense for sure, is just the farthest they go. That would be the most Tennessee Volunteer thing of all time, is that's how this goes over this, like however long Vitello's here, whatever the 7-year, 10-year, whatever it is, like that's the farthest they go was last year. That would drive me up the freaking wall, Ryan Schumpert.
Yeah, no, that it is pretty fun. I mean, that's baseball for you. Like,
yeah, that's the most baseball thing too. It's just,
yeah, it really is, and it's like I go back to this Tennessee getting to Omaha with that offense they had last year was hard to imagine.
We're not going to be mean.
I guess
we're not going to be mean. I'm not doing it. Yeah. We're moving forward. I'm turning the page. I'm not being mean. New year, new me. Who dis?
I can't. I mean, I'm going to clip that, and I'm going to have it on my phone, and I'm going to play it in early April when Tennessee is struggling in some series, and you are being very mean to some pitcher or.
Who do you think it is? Who's the number one pick, Ryan? Who's the number one pick that you would peg is going to be my enemy number one for this Tennessee baseball team all year long? Who would you guess right now? Who's enemy number one?
That's a really good question. I think it's Hunter Inslee. He's my
pick. He's clutch. I like Hunter Inslee. He's fine. I'm okay with Hunter Inslee.
But Hunter Inslee falls into the tier of player you frequently, I won't say bash, but I can't think of the right word. So take it a tier down from bash, which is solid player.
Yeah.
Not extremely talented, more talented players in the similar position that he plays. That's going to most likely start almost every single game.
I think right now Blake Burke is my number one pick for this year.
That was the other person that came to mind. And it's more like feasible this year of it being it, because last year was like, certainly Blake Burke was maddening, and it was like, oh my gosh, like I think everybody thought Tony should have made the move quicker to him lower in the batting order, but it was like no one was ever going to start over in the first base. Like, you didn't really have an option. This year you got Billy Amick, and if Zane Denton is does end up being on the team, like I think everybody hopes and expects, but obviously that's been a tenuous situation this offseason. You have, and even if you don't, you have Dalton Bargo. You got a lot of options of dudes that can play corner infield this year. You don't have to have Blake Burke, where last year you did. So that's going to be, that was the first person that came to mind. I still think Inslee's more likely, but that's another good potential one. And again, this year it makes it fascinating just because Tennessee actually has options there.
Absolutely. Ryan Schumpert, thank you as always, my friend. Go visit RockyTopInsider.com today. If you've not already done so, lock it in, bookmark it, all kinds of great Tennessee Volunteer coverage throughout the basketball, baseball, football season each and every day. So lock that in. Ryan Schumpert, always a pleasure. I'll talk to you next week.